Okay, so I've got this very basic space set up, but now I want to set up some renders with some artificial lights instead of relying on the sun. Before I do that though, I'm going to very quickly just bring up the render settings so that you can see how it's going to work with only the sunlight, and then we can compare that to the artificial lights. So I'm going to turn the shadows on, and you can see that I've got the sun set up to come through the windows, and so I'm going to get a decent amount of light just with the natural sunlight. And so here it's set to interior sun only, and draft, that's the only setting I've got there. And then when I render, you get sunlight. And it's really important that you can render your spaces, if they have natural light and artificial light, that you can render it with both types of lighting. So there we go, so you've got plenty of light, and I can then use the exposure controls to reduce that brightness, because with natural light you're often going to get overexposed areas. I'm going to use adjust exposure to bring that down. But then as you start to reduce these overexposed areas where it's all white, you're going to get really dark areas where it doesn't receive enough light. And unfortunately in Revit there's no overrides for global illumination. In other words, you can't cheat and add in extra bounce lighting the way you can with lots of other rendering programs like V-Ray definitely, and Mental Ray could do that as well, which is the old one Revit used to use, but the new one called ART that Revit now uses doesn't give you that option. So to get more balanced lighting, we definitely want to have some artificial lights. Sorry, and so the other thing I want is a ceiling. At the moment we've just got a floor at the top there. So I'm going to go to the level 1 sorry, floor plan. Let's make sure, yeah. So level 1 floor plan, this is the space I was looking at. And then on the architecture tab you've got the ceiling tool. And if you're lucky, it will trace the area that you need. And this is actually going to work pretty well if I use that automatic option. And you can tell as you move your cursor over different spaces whether that's working. You can see there that red border comes up. But it's tracing that for me. It's choosing the walls. And you don't always want that to happen. So that's, again, with this automatic ceiling option. I'm going to change it instead to sketch ceiling. And with that, you've got all the same options you have for making a floor. And I'm just going to use pick walls, and that way I can pick just the outer walls there and ignore these little extra walls in there which I don't want to pick up. And you can flip side to side if it doesn't come in just like a floor. But remember, if this isn't working for you, delete that line. It would have been okay, but I'll just delete it so you can see that you can draw the shapes just like you do with the floor if the picking options don't give you what you want. So I've got the basic outline that I want for my ceiling in the plan view, and then I'm just going to make sure all of those corners are connected to give me a closed shape. And then I'm going to finish it, and you'll see it disappears. That's probably what you should expect, because this is a plan view. It's a floor plan. So this is when you can finally start to use the ceiling plans if you haven't used these already. I'll go to my level 1 ceiling plan, and this is unfortunately in wireframe, so we can see the floor above, but if I change it to hidden line, notice how this part, where the ceiling is solid. Over here, I've got the floor showing from level 1, and there's no ceiling blocking that floor, so we can see the floor. So I'm selecting the ceiling just by clicking inside that plan, and that works because I've turned the option on down here to select by face. So that's a really good option if you haven't tried it. If that's off, it's much harder to select the ceiling because I can't select it in the middle. I'd have to go to the edge and use tab, and I can get it that way. But again, if you turn that option on, select by face, you can just click in the middle and you should get it. The other problem you can have with views like this is the view range. So it's a good idea to look at that. And it's in the view properties. You've got the properties there that tells us ceiling plan. So if I scroll down, you'll see there's this option view range. And so notice how the door there, it's showing greyed out. I'm just going to fix that because you might not get that. So I'm going to send this underlay option here for the first, range-based level. I'm going to set that back to none. And that's why you'll see in a lot of the views you get those greyed out lines. Right, that comes from the underlay. So I'll set that to none, and then the plan shows normally without those extra grey lines. And so again, the door's missing. You probably know it's there because we saw it in the other plan, but in this one we can't see it. So coming back to the view range, it's because the cut plane is too high. So remember, a floor plan is just a horizontal section. So it's cutting through at a certain height. And 2300 is the default height. I've always thought that was too high because I like to see my doors in the ceiling plan. I want to plan the lights and the other things and know where the doors are. So I'm going to bring that cut plane down to 1800. Hit apply, and now I can see the doors. The other thing that can cause issues with the ceiling plans is the top. That's normally the one you need to look at because it might be set to a lower height. So if I make this set to the associated level and then make it offset, let's say 2700. That's a common setting people use for ceilings that are that high. So now, bring it up. Let's have a look at that. So 2700 associated level. Oh, level 1, that's right. Yeah, sometimes it'll get it even though it's above the view range. So let's bring it down a bit more, 2400. And it's still coming up, how annoying. Let's just bring the ceiling up a bit more. Because you will get this, even though, well, I'm just going to show you what it can look like, because it's not behaving. But often you'll get it like this, where the ceiling is there, but you can't see it. And you'll know what I mean when it happens to you. So again, when that happens, just make sure you've had a look at the view range settings, and you've made the top higher. In this case, it's working for me anyway, but normally you do need to make the top higher than the ceiling. And the simple option normally is to choose level above the top, and then the offset there can just be 0. Oh, here's because I didn't change the view depth. Okay, I'm going to make it work because I want to show you it. So again, I'll bring that just for the time being. I know it's a bit confusing, but now bring that to 2400, and then the view depth, this is where it's really confusing. The view depth in a ceiling plan is up, not down. In a floor plan, view depth is down, but in a ceiling plan, because ceiling plans are looking up, they're a mirror image, it's down. So anyway, so now if we bring this view depth back to the same value as the top, that's it. That's what it should look like. So there you can see the floor over here has disappeared, and if I click in the middle there, there's no ceiling. It's there. If we go to the section view, you can see it is definitely going to be there. There's my ceiling. But the view range stops about here. So again, when you start to work with ceilings, you need to be comfortable adjusting your view range. And again, usually the top can just be set to the level above. The only issue is if you have a mezzanine that's in between the two levels you need to work with, and then you might need to set it to the level above that. So it might need to be roof instead of level above. So I'll just show you the one last thing about view range, because I probably haven't explained it all that well, but even if you explain it perfectly, it takes a while for all that to sink in. And that's why they've put this little diagram there to try and explain how it works graphically. When you click on the show button, you've got this pretty good diagram that shows what those different settings mean. And so I'll let you have a look at that and see what all those numbers relate to. And then you can read up on it. You can see there's a bit more to it than that, but that does give you the basic concepts. So again, now I can see my ceiling. That's half the battle. Once you get to that point, putting the lights in won't take that long. So to place the lights, now I can go place a component. But before I do that, I'm just going to change one last setting. I'm going to set the underlay back to, believe it or not, the same level as the one I'm working on. Yeah, level 1. That's it, because then we get a plan of the level to go with our ceiling plan. And that's a helpful thing. And so back to, so the underlay, the primary, that range base level, you can choose the same level as the one you're working on. Yeah. So here again, place a component, load family, and I'll start with the default library. So I'm going to go to the lighting folder there, architectural, internal, and you have this one called downlight recessed can, which was an incandescent recessed light, but you can use it to make an LED light. They basically look the same. And good chance to show you another little thing. I've definitely loaded that family. You saw it asked me if I wanted to override it, but then notice it hasn't picked it up in properties here. And you might have seen that happen already when you start to load families and you've loaded ones that you've loaded before. You've probably seen that happen. It doesn't pick it. So this thing to remember, if you don't see it, you know you've loaded it, and it's let you load it, but it still hasn't picked it over here. You have to go to that list and find it in the list. It's just one of those annoying things, but once you know, it's not too bad. So here, if I find downlight recessed can, any of those types will work. These are just different voltages which have no effect on the brightness. So it doesn't matter which one you choose. They're different size, but they're not different brightnesses. So I've got 152mm and 203mm, and don't worry about the fluorescent. So they're fairly big. You can always edit them to make a smaller size, but I'll just live with the 150 for now, and I'll put a few in. And what I really recommend with lighting, because it does automate the rendering for you when you put lights into a 3D program like this, it's still a very technical thing. If you want to get right into the technical aspects of lighting, you'll spend your life studying it. I've read a few dozen books on lighting, and I'm still always learning things. And so what I really recommend, though, is that you put in as few as possible and then test it out. So I've only put in those 4 lights, and now I'm going to go back to rendering and change this to, well, I'll ask you, what do you think would be good? I've got interior sun and artificial or interior artificial only. I know that's the tempting thing. You want to probably try it with the sun and artificial because you want the sunlight, because you've already got that light working, but it's actually better to try with artificial only first. Just because the sun is super, super bright. It's, as far as I know, brighter than any man-made light source. Lighthouses are some of the brightest that I know of. The lights in there are super bright, and spotlights at sports stadiums, they're super bright as well. When you compare the brightness of those lights to the sun, it's still a fraction of it. So, and you'll see this with photography. The sunlight is always going to overpower the artificial lights. So it's a very difficult thing to balance those two things, sun and artificial. So it's better to try it with artificial only first. And then you can firstly tell if the lights are working at all, because it's possible for them to be blocked. It's possible for there to be a problem with the family. There are lots of issues you can have with your lights, and there's nothing worse than seeing someone who spent hours or days putting in a few thousand lights into their huge models, place them all beautifully, and they look good in 3D, but then they don't render at all. And testing that out can take hours just to figure out, where the problem is. So you can see here, it's working. If you can see some light, it's working. So what do we need to brighten this up? Exactly, exposure. It's not the light, it's the exposure levels. And your eyes automatically adjust for different light levels. And with cameras, you have to manually adjust it, and that's exactly what we're doing here with the exposure controls. So changing that exposure value to make it brighter. The range should be from about 2. 2 should be the lowest. If you're going lower than 2, there's a problem with your lights. So that 2 is for very low light situations. Even with these 4 lights, that's too low. So working our way up from 2, if you're going to 15, that's way too high. 15 is for the sun, and that's just going to be too dark. But the range should be about 2 to 15, and you want to have a pretty basic idea of that, but as you adjust that slider and click apply, you're definitely going to see the result. And again, when you're looking at that exposure level, you're looking for overexposed areas that are all white, and they're the things you're trying to avoid or tune out. So as I bring this, brighter, that's actually alright, but as I go brighter again, we'll start to get some overexposed areas, starting to here, and a bit brighter again, and that's overexposed. You can definitely see it here. So that should be the approach, and as you add more lights, you'll need to come back and tweak your exposure value. But I think you can easily get more balanced lighting using just artificial, rather than trying to use sun and artificial. If I use sun and artificial now, it's going to change my exposure value, but it still won't be very good. It's just like artificial, sorry, it's just like sun only. You can barely tell the artificial lights are doing anything. It's a bit better than before with just the sun, but you'll see when I go and fix the exposure. So if I make this darker to reduce the exposure in these brightly lit areas, we're again getting the dark issues over here. So it's very hard. The only way I've ever made it work was to make the artificial lights about 10 times brighter than they are in real life. And it's something you see in real life. If you take a photo of a room that's got the lights on, but there's sunlight coming in, you won't be able to know that you won't tell that the lights are on. And your eyes will do this too. I'm sure you've all seen, bright sunlight coming into a room through a window. So yeah, it's a thing to just spend some time looking at. And so then once we've got these lights working, you can keep adding more and just building on that. So we don't go too far into the lights themselves today, but I'll just show you very quickly if you want to go further with it, and I'll go into the lighting types in detail next week. If you select any light, go to Edit Family, and you'll see the light source. So that's this yellow thing. And when you select that and go to Light Source Definition, you'll see the basic kinds of lights. And these are the same across pretty much all 3D programs. And even Photoshop lights give you very similar options because they're coming from the same background. You've essentially got omnidirectional lights, or in this case they're called spherical lights. Don't worry about the emitting. In Revit, the emitter from the shape makes very little difference. In a proper rendering program like 3ds Max, it matters, but again, not with Revit. So I'm looking mainly at the light distribution at the bottom. So spherical emits in all directions, and that's, again, sometimes called omnidirectional. Hemispherical is just half of that. It's a bit of a Revit thing. Not all programs give you that option, but it's handy if you need it. But then the other most important one is spotlight. So spherical or omnidirectional lights are non-targeted. Spotlights are. And so they're your main basic light types. Spherical or omni, and then spotlights or directional lights. There are different kinds of directional lights, but spotlights are the most important for you. And, well, the sun is another important one, but that's automatic. So this also has the cone of light, which is an important thing you can adjust. We'll get to that next week. But then the final one is probably the most interesting, but also probably the hardest to understand, and that's a photometric web. Have any of you come across IES lighting? You have? Oh, good, yeah. So if you've seen that, have you seen where it comes up? IES? Oh, good. So if you're using V-Ray, yes. So V-Ray, and a lot of these programs, they give you the same options. Yes, that's really good. So IES, it means International Illumination Engineering Society. And so, yeah, so you can use those IES files in any rendering program, and V-Ray is brilliant for IES. And they are files set up by these engineers, lighting engineers, that give you the perfect lighting distribution that the lights have in real life. And it looks amazing. They look really realistic, and they give you beautiful distribution, especially up against a wall or something. Exactly, yeah. That's right, yeah. That's right. You probably get that many with the program, and then you can download thousands of them for free. If you just go to the web, there's the IES website, and then you can just keep adding them. And it's a really good thing once you know about it, so that's really good. And so with that photometric web, you set an IES file that gives you the distribution. And this is where, again, the physics of light, if you want to get into it, it's really interesting, but it gets amazingly complicated because light doesn't just go in a straight line. You'd think it would, but it's not. And I don't want to get right, I'm not an expert with the physics, but I've done a bit of it. And light is one of those crazy things, like a lot of things in physics. It's not common sense. It's not what you think it is quite often. And the distribution, it goes in curves and waves and creates all these sort of interesting patterns. But the good thing is you don't need to be a physics genius to do all of those things. These engineers have worked all of that for you, and they just give you the files, and then you just set it in here using a web file. So once you know about it, you can do that, and well, maybe it's a quick thing I can show you. So once you choose Photometric Web, go into here, and you can set the ones with Revit as well, just like V-Ray. They do give you a few IES files to get you going. Here, that's where you set them. And so here we've got some different distributions. And so here goes Spot Ideal. So that's a type of spotlight. So I've just loaded that. And there we are. So that shows us a bit of what the distribution looks like. And there are some much more crazy ones than that. If you want to get into it, it's an amazing thing. And I think it's pretty cool that, you know, things, this is, you know, the real world, are not just this boring straight line stuff that you think would be the case. And so that one's interesting, but then there's some much more sort of crazy. Oh, you can, yeah. Now with here, there's a really, see, that's a distribution. That is a real light. Yeah, you can change the angle. Yeah, with spotlights, it's much easier because the angle's built in. So I'll just go back. Oh, absolutely. You can tilt it any direction you want. Yeah, no problem. Oh, so in here, when you go to that family types, you'll see there's an angle property. So there, the tilt angle, you can just adjust that. Yeah, 90 degrees is straight down. Yeah, you can make it any angle you want. Yeah. And you'll see I've made quite a few light families where you can adjust the direction going like compass points, so which way it points, and then you can also change the tilt angle. I'll show you those next week, but they're all in the library on the P drive. So, but I'm going to try it out with this distribution. So I've changed that light just to get you started with distributions. I'll load that back into my project. So I've changed that spotlight. Oh, it's a down light, but it was a spotlight before. And yeah, because they're all the same type. So when I render again now, hopefully we'll be able to see the difference with the distribution. Okay, the exposure's gone back down, that's all right, fix that. Might take a bit longer to render because it's a more complicated thing for it. But it's on draft, it should go pretty quick. But yeah, and once you understand these principles, you can carry them across to programs like V-Ray, like Annie was mentioning, or I mean, in 3ds Max there are many other rendering programs you can use, apart from ART, which is the one that we have in Revit. You can use ART in 3ds Max as well, and that's a good way to start it. Yeah, V-Ray is a great rendering program if you're interested in that. Corona is another one to try. So there we are. So that's a completely different distribution. And you can see hopefully the effect. It's also a much cooler light somehow. Don't know why that's happened. Oh yeah, yeah. Yes, absolutely, yeah. So maybe we'll finish up with that. So when we select the light and go to edit type, you'll see that the tilt angle is there. I could change that. But then further down, you've got the colour, if you're interested in that, if you know about warm and cool lights. This is where you adjust this, and yeah, it's gone to xenon, which is one of the coolest lights. That's too cool, so let's go to a fully warm one so you can just see the difference. Incandescent, the old energy chewing, environment destroying things. Alright, so they are super warm, and so let's just, before I do that, render, quickly look at the setting that you probably also want to know about for the brightness. So that's probably the last one I'll really look at. So initial intensity is the one you use to change the brightness, not light loss factor. Because sometimes people see this and think, great, there's a dimmer there, I can dim and brighten the light using that one. don't touch it, because that's getting into the physics again, and you don't want to do that. It's too much maths. So, so here, this is all you do. Change the overall lumens to make the light brighter or less bright. 2000 is actually fairly bright anyway, so that's okay. So I'll just render again, and you're going to see, without touching the exposure, it should be much warmer. There we go. Too warm. But that's lighting. You obviously have warm and cool lights in real life, and most of the time you're probably trying to go for neutral, but it's also a good thing to try and use those light colours as part of your design, and you can do that as well. You can even mix them, even though that's really difficult. Having warm and cool lights in the same space can be a bit tricky. Having some neutral and some warm, or some neutral and some cool, isn't as difficult. But often you want to go for a similar colour, colour temperature for your lighting, especially at first. Otherwise it can get a bit unbalanced. Yeah, so you can play with those things, but again, take it slow, just get a few lights to work, adjust them, and then you can keep building on that. And so the final thing I'll say there is that I've been focusing on ceiling lights, but you have plenty of other kinds of lights, and again, we'll get into the fundamental properties of lights next week, but you've got floor lights. These are just the, you know, the, what are they called? Lights on stands. I don't even think of the word for them, which are pretty daggy, but they work. And then you've got, there are lights that are built into the floor, which do work really well. There's sconces, which are, of course, your wall lights. Right, so they work. And there are different kinds of pendant lights, which are the ceiling light. And then you've got freestanding lights. So you've got, maybe there aren't any here except the studio light, but there are lots of other folders where I can show you some different floating lights next week, but for now I'll just get the studio light, and that's one that we use all the time. That's a floating ball of light that you can use to add light to your scene. And again, I've loaded it before, so I've got to go and find it in the list here. There it is. So it's just a big ball of light, but it's a great way of just filling in light in your scene without having to add in too many light fixtures. So you'll see back now when I go to render again, should have a lot more light, probably too much, but let's see how it goes. Yeah, okay, so what's the problem? I know what it is. Studio light, well, apart from the fact my exposure's got to be adjusted, but my studio light, I know by default, is very bright. So looking at this, it's 7,000. Remember the downlights were 2,000. And so I'll try and take it back to a similar level, around 2,000. It shouldn't overpower everything else. But lighting's a great thing, and the fact that you can experiment with these lights that basically work almost like lights in the real world. It's very close, the physics of it. And people who specialise in lighting, well, salespeople essentially, who work for the lighting companies, I've dealt with many of them over the years. They spend their whole life learning about lighting. It's a huge area, but they learn it by practically experimenting with lights, and you can do exactly the same thing with the rendering programs. So this is overexposed, but I'll definitely dial this back in a second. Make it a bit nicer with the exposure. Okay, so again, as you add more lights, you'll need to then dial the exposure back, and that's much more balanced. But I still wouldn't be obviously going a lot further with that. So maybe the very last thing, I'll show you some of my own finished lighting. Okay, so this is one that's lit entirely with one light called the sun. There we are, so that's all sunlight. but I only could do that because the rendering programs let me tweak the bounced lighting values. Yeah, that's all rendering. There's no photos there. This is all rendering. So here's one of my own house, which is again that sunlight, and then these interiors are all artificially lit. And I spent a long time balancing the lighting in these, even though they might look simple. Just balancing. Right? Yeah. So especially when you've got lights close to surfaces like walls. Well, going back to here. So, they're not too bad, but these in the lounge room, yeah, because the lights they're going up to the wall, it took me a few hours to get that light level just right to not overblow. Yeah. Well, I mean, it worked for all the lights. Yeah. And then, yeah, so that's sunlight again. Yeah. So, I mean, I've got much better work than this to put up there. This website hasn't been updated for far too long. But anyway, just to give you an idea. I'll show you some better stuff later.